This is section 3 of chapter 15, finishing up evolution. In this video, we're going to look at patterns of evolution. There are several ways that species can adapt to their habitats. The pattern and speed of evolution results from changing requirements of the environment. So there's going to be a few different patterns of how a species can evolve, and that's what we're going to look at today. The first pattern is called coevolution. Remembering what co means is together. Coevolution is the change of two or more species in close association with each other. A good example of this would be predator-prey or parasite-host. And I put a picture up here of hummingbird, and you can see the specific structure of the flower here, how it has a very long, the flower is very tall because it's made specifically for hummingbirds that have this very long beak that can reach into these like tubular kind of flowers to get the nectar. The nectar is down here near the sepals, which we learned about last year. And so the hummingbird and these flowers have a very tight relationship as they evolve together. So if the height of the flower becomes taller, then the length of the beak of the hummingbird will get longer as well. So there's a coevolution example of butterflies and their predator, which is birds. So we'll just start here at the beginning where you've got the monarch is inedible to birds because as a caterpillar, the monarch butterfly eats a plant called milkweed, which is very bitter. And so as an adult, the monarch tastes very bitter. So the bird then evolves to better spot the differences between a mimic and a monarch. A mimic is a different kind of butterfly. There, in this example, there's a butterfly called the viceroy, and the viceroy butterfly looks very, very similar. You can see the difference. Here's, I don't know if this is the monarch or not, but basically they look really similar. So if the bird becomes better able to identify a mimic versus the actual monarch, then the bird is going to start to feed on the mimics that it's able to distinguish from the monarch. So then the mimic is going to start to evolve to look more like the monarch, and that increases the chance that the monarch will be accidentally eaten by birds, and it will evolve to look less like the mimic. So there's a lot of things going on. There's 3 different things that are happening between the mimic, the monarch, and the bird. So the bird evolves to spot the differences better. Then the bird feeds on the mimic. The mimic starts to look more like the monarch. So then the monarch is going to be accidentally eaten by birds, which means that the monarch is going to start to evolve to look less like the mimic. And so the cycle continues. Another example, obviously, that is not that zebras will evolve to be able to ride a motorcycle, but the difference here is that the zebra is the prey of the lion, and so they have to evolve to be faster than the lion. They also, the zebras stay in herds so that as an individual, they are less likely to be eaten in a herd as they are if they are by themselves. And of course, the lions in turn will evolve to be better hunters. They hunt in packs, things like that. Another example of coevolution, and I think I had a video about this that I showed before, which is this caterpillar. So the caterpillar has a chemical in the saliva, and the fact that the plant is being eaten by the caterpillar, and this signals the plant to release chemicals that will then stimulate or attract, they'll attract these parasitic wasps that lay their eggs within the caterpillars. So as the caterpillars eat the plant releases chemicals that attract the wasp that lays eggs in the caterpillars, and the caterpillars die.
My parents were both botanists, sort of, not professionally, but they're botanically inclined. And I spent my weekends, my afternoons just roaming around the neighborhood, climbing trees and so forth. My father was half an entomologist, right? He was in plant protection, so he knew a lot about insects and how to kill them. The colony's down there. But there'll be there will be foraging tunnels all over here. Here, let's go here. I was interested always why some species cooperate. Individuals get together to make a society. And here was a more complex society. There's some cooperation between different species called mutualisms, right? And I was fascinated by that. So this is the colony. If you just stomp on it. So this is one of the largest insect societies that are known. There's one queen, perhaps several queens, and they are tended and assisted by maybe 5 million, 10 million workers. Workers come in different sizes. There's some really large ones like these over here that are called soldiers. They're mostly in defense of the colonies. They're not particularly adept at growing the fungus garden. For example, this one I just got cut here and I'm bleeding now. That was one of the soldiers who bit into my skin. Yeah, so underneath here, on this mound that the ants have excavated, say over the last 5 years, perhaps 10 years, they have built this huge metropolis underground that consists, I would estimate, of perhaps 500, perhaps 1,000 fungus gardens of the kind that I have in my laboratory too. It's about football-sized fungus gardens that the ants have constructed underground here. They go from, say, here in this area, about 1 meter deep, maybe to about 15 meters deep. So that would be, almost 50 feet deep. That'd be the deepest garden. And some of the tunnels that the ants are constructing reach actually much deeper, usually to the groundwater level, from which the ants bring up moisture to moisten these gardens in summer. These gardens are grown on leaf material that the ants are carried to the nest, usually through an extensive tunnel system that ramify out in all directions. So the ants cut the leaves on trees or on shrubs near the ground, carry it above ground on their trails that they construct to these tunnels, and then underground until they reach the fungus chambers where the ants process the leaf material, and then they insert them into those gardens. The fungus grows, makes nutritive structures, and these are rich in nutrients. They're high in protein, they're high in sugars, and they can sustain the growth of the ants themselves as well as the larvae. Much of what fascinates me about biodiversity is the intricacy of the interactions. The ant has been modified evolutionarily in the response to the interaction with the fungus, and likewise the fungus has been changed, modified evolutionary in response to the interaction with the ants. And out of the interaction of these many individuals, each following individual decision rules that they have evolved with, emerges an entire new kind of property that did not exist if fewer individuals or one individual were to express this behavior. For me, the big remaining questions is to understand better the principles, how these ants are able to manage their crop together with beneficial microbes. So there's good microbes in soils that humans sometimes have used to combat the really bad microbes that are detrimental to the growth. And that is the kind of tricky that human agriculture has discovered only in the last 10 or 20 years. And the ants have figured this out 50 million years ago, and they've used that to their advantage during their entire evolutionary history. And I don't mind them crawling over me. I've sort of got used to it. A few years ago, I did this massive survey where I dug up 200 nests throughout Texas of this ant. I did this all by myself, usually on the weekend whenever my family lets me go. And sometimes I had to dig very deep. And then when you're digging for a long time, eventually you have them all over. Because you're in a big hole, sometimes they're on the side and there's ants and you have them crawling all over the head. I guess that's a kind of occupational hazard that you have to tolerate when you get used to that.
Okay, so that was an example of coevolution on how, like, over 50 million years, the ants and the fungus have developed and evolved together. The second kind of evolutionary pattern is called convergent. If you just think about what the word convergent means, like in math, you have convergent lines that they come together. So this little cartoon is an example where this guy says, "Oh my God, we have such similar beaks. Are we related?" And he says, "No, I think it's just because we live in the same area." And that is the basis behind convergent evolution. When the environment selects similar phenotypes, even though the ancestors are very different. And a really good example of that is the shark dolphin um, evolution, and also between bird and insect. So if we just look at the shark and the dolphin, they look extremely similar, even though the shark is a fish and the dolphin is a mammal. So they don't have a close evolutionary relationship in that respect. But you see how their bodies are very streamlined for swimming in the water. That's something called fusiform. That's the shape of the body. It's like streamlined to reduce the friction from swimming. You see, they both have these dorsal fins here. Oh, sorry, pelvic fins, pectoral fins. Yeah, these are the pectoral fins. Think of pecs. These are your pecs, right? Pec muscle. This is the dorsal fin, and you can see the difference mainly is that the dolphin's fin curves slightly back a little bit. The dolphin obviously has the hole in the top of the head because it's not a fish. It doesn't have gills like the shark does. It still has to breathe air, so it uses the blowhole to get air when it surfaces. The big difference is that their tails, the fish tail goes back and forth like this. So the tail is, I guess, perpendicular to the ground, whereas the dolphin tail is flat and it goes up and down like this, not side to side. This is fish, this is mammal. And so the dolphin's tail would be parallel to the ground. So they have the up and down motion or the side to side motion like the sharks in a fish. The other thing they both have is the very similar coloration. They have white bellies and gray or bluish gray tops of the bodies. The reason for that is because of the fact that they are predators. Even though dolphins are like super cute, they still eat fish. And so if you are a predator in the ocean and the prey is beneath you, so you want to have a white or a light colored lower body, because when the prey is below you and they look up, you have the sunlight that shines down. And so that would mean that it's very light. Like when you're looking up, it's very light. So you want your belly to be light colored to match with that environment. But if your prey is above you and they look down, that's the darkness of the ocean. So you want the top part of your body to be dark so that you're camouflaged both from above and below. So the same thing here. So this is an article from Science Times from like quite a long time ago, but it says when nature discovers the same design over and over, and it shows you the difference between the bird and the pterodactyl, which is an extinct dinosaur, and of course the bat. They all have the same general form because it is ideal for flying creatures. It's not that they're exactly related, although I will say that birds evolved from dinosaurs, so those two are related, but mammals are not, even though the overall body structure looks similar. Okay, and then finally we have divergent evolution, which is kind of the opposite of convergent evolution. So here again in the cartoon, we say, "Auntie, are you sure you're my aunt? The picture you sent me doesn't look like you at all." And he goes, "Niece, I am sure that I am your aunt. I look different now because I don't live in the desert anymore." So divergent, again, divergent lines when you have a similar origin of evolution, but because of environmental differences, you evolve into two different species. So two or more related populations become more and more dissimilar. Now, there's going to be two ways that divergent evolution can occur. One of them is called adaptive radiation, which is natural. This is, you think of the word adaptive radiation, I'll talk about it in a minute, but the other one is called artificial selection, and this is what we do. So the best example of divergent evolution is with the species Canis familiaris, which is the common dog. And so I just have a picture here of a Great Dane and a Chihuahua. They are the same species, which means they can reproduce and form fertile offspring, meaning that the offspring can reproduce. You do have species like the donkey and the horse, which are two different species which can reproduce, but they produce infertile offspring. The mule or the jackass, the same thing. The offspring is not fertile, which means it's not a successful mating. I think the lion and tiger as well, they've got like tigans and ligers, depending on which species is the male, which one's the female. So, oops, wrong way. Okay, so the natural way, the natural way that divergent evolution occurs is through something called adaptive radiation, going all the way back to the beginning of this chapter when we talked about Darwin and his finches. This is how his finches evolved. So you can see from the diagram here how the differences occurred. So they took an ancestral seed-eating ground finch, and then you can see how it divides up based on the kind of food that they have to eat. So if this finch, if they had different members of the population which radiated or spread out, which is the radiation part of it, and they radiated out into different environments, they would have to adapt to the new environment. So we have the fruit eaters, insect eaters, cactus eaters, and seed eaters. The seed eaters, obviously, you can see they need crushing bills. This is where you have ground finches. They wouldn't have to necessarily be able to form nests or be able to perch in trees because they they gather nuts, they eat nuts and seeds, and so that would be on the ground. Then you have the cactus and insect eaters. The insect eaters might have a grasping bill, and the cactus or insect eaters have probing bills, depending on, the bill is the beak, by the way. Should actually be beak because a bill is for a duck. That's like the flat beak. Anyway, and then parrot-like, I guess, the fruit eaters. So you just see the difference here based on the type of food that they eat, which we've talked about before, which I've talked about before. You guys just don't talk. Unfortunately, you just have to sit and listen to me. Okay, I think let's see what that is. And no, because I can't share the window. Just makes it too complicated. Okay, so the non-natural, the unnatural, the man-made type of divergent evolution is called artificial selection. And this is what we do when we breed dogs and cats. We are artificially selecting which characteristics of the breed that we like and which we would like to emphasize. So we get weird dogs like this guy, that one that just looks like a giant mop. And I ultimately, I mean, I know that we love to have certain aspects in our dogs, but you just think about what it is like for this dog as an individual to carry around that much weight and hair. And the moppier it looks, then the better off we say that it looks, because that's the characteristic of this breed. But I just wonder, like, when you start breeding too much, I know Thailand has a problem, I think, with golden retrievers, that there's not enough, that the gene pool is too small. They're not bringing enough golden retrievers from outside of the country to breed with dogs that are here. So if your gene pool gets smaller and smaller, you have a lot of problems. So you have a lot of purebred dogs that have health issues, especially like something like hip dysplasia, which is what my pug has. Hip dysplasia is basically like, you have the top of your femur that sits in your pelvis at the base. So your femur is the ball and socket joint. So it's supposed to be like this. And so what happens with hip dysplasia is that the head of the femur slips out. And so it can shift down or shift away. And so that's what's happened with my pug in both hips. And that's the problem that you get when you have purebred dogs and not a big enough selection of parents that are that are providing the genetic information. The gene pool is just too small. And there we have, I think that's called a Caucasian, I'm not sure. This is what Siamese cats used to look like. Okay, they were actually like the coloration is the same when you have like the very like black feet, black tails, and like dark ears and face, and the rest of it's kind of like this brownish color. And this is what we've turned it into. This is what we look for in a Siamese cat today. The coloration is still the same, but we've bred them so that they now have blue eyes. We've bred them so that the face is very triangular and pointy and big ears. But that's the difference. And it turns out actually that like just Thai domestic short hairs are more like what they want Siamese cats to be like today. Okay, I originally had an activity scheduled. I think I'm still gonna do it, but I have to set it up for like individual things because obviously I can't have you doing group work. But basically, what I'm going to do is it's going to be a creative project. So it won't be a team, but and it won't be a pair of animals. I will give each person one animal, and I will give you one environmental change. What I want you to do is, as an individual, predict the evolutionary changes that will take place in your animal over the next 100,000 years. It's going to require a little bit of research based on the current habitat and the way of life of your animal to then determine what effect the environmental change will have on that animal. So depending on how I pick it, I'm just going to kind of randomly pull stuff out of my butt, because there's 10 of you. I don't know how many of you will continue at school, but I'll assign it to all 10 of you anyway. But let's say you have, I give you like a dolphin, and the environmental impact, the environmental change is that the polar ice caps melt. There might not actually be that much of an environmental change. I'll try not to do that because that would be super stupid if you're just like, yeah, it would be the same. So I'll try to pair it up so that it will have an effect on your animal. But you'll definitely just have to think about the niche of this particular animal, like the way of life of this animal, and then how the environmental change will affect it. Once you know how and where your species live now, you'll better be able to understand how your environmental change affects your species. Each of you are going to draw or design a picture of your new adapted or evolved animal after 100,000 years, and you're going to explain based on your environmental changes the basis of your evolution. So you have to explain why you made the changes that you did. And you can be as creative as you want, because honestly, like, who the hell knows? Like, you might say, you know, like, I don't know, if whatever, just be creative with it. I mean, pretty much everyone will get 100% on the project anyway, because it's online learning, and because I'm sure that, well, hopefully if you don't half-ass it. If you half-ass it, then you don't get full score. But anyway, I'm going to figure out that project, and that will be the project for this chapter.